our next presentation, which was supposed to start at 2 o'clock, was with Ryan Hudson. Unfortunately, Ryan told us this morning at about, I don't know, 9 or 9:30 a.m. that his wife just went into labor and they're having their fourth or fifth kid. I can't remember what it is, but they have a bunch of kids. So Ryan is at the hospital, obviously, with his wife, which is where he should be. So he can't make it today. It was going to be a fascinating presentation. For those of you that don't know, Ryan is the co-founder of Honey, which is an application that is used, by just thousands and probably millions of online shoppers. And it gives you the best deal. It shops for all the discount codes when you're buying a product. PayPal liked it so much that it recently bought the company for $4 billion. And we were really excited to have Ryan join us. So we will do our best to get him for next Eclectic Convergence next November. I'm sure we can guilt him into it. It'll be quite easy because Scott knows him. So what we are going to do instead is Paulina and I are going to interview Scott. Now, the funny thing is this happened last year when we had one of our feature presenters actually got into a car accident where he was hit by a car, believe it or not. He's okay, but he obviously couldn't make it after that. And I interviewed Scott instead of Scott interviewing him. And it turned out to be great. And I think that today will be just as good.
We can make it a conversation, right, Zach and Paulina?
Yeah, it's going to be a quick conversation. It'll just be about 20 minutes because it'll get us back on track.
We'll try to cover some interesting ground, but we're all thinking of Ryan. And when I saw that email this morning, I was like, oh, equally excited for him, but also like it would have been great to have him. But we will have him next year.
Absolutely, it'll be super. So Q&A is still live. So use the Q&A box if you want to ask Scott a question, and we'll take it that way. So Scott, the first question I'll ask to you is, how has the pandemic accelerated the adoption of technology?
Well, I'm glad we're talking about this because I think this is relevant to all of us. Yep. And I work at a company in the digital transformation business, and it was I don't think any of us knew at the first moment when the world started to shut down whether which businesses would be safe, which businesses would really struggle and benefit in some ways. It turns out that a lot of companies that build tools for new ways of people working together digitally, obviously they had to be, they became part of the solution to people remote working and changing their practices. But another interesting trend that happened is that all of the companies that did use these tools always had what I like to call the holdouts. The few people, not few, maybe 20% of people who for whatever reason would say, hey, instead of Slack, just send me an email. Or, or I'd rather meet in person and not make this a video meeting, or whatever the case may be. These holdouts were the folks that worked with us either within our businesses or clients or stakeholders of our work that in some ways always held us back from fully capitalizing and realizing on the newfound productivity from all these cool digital tools that we've had for years. And in one fell swoop, within weeks, everyone went through this enormous forcing function for refactoring the way that they work. And you suddenly saw usage and all of these tools go up, even from their own users who were entitled but never actually started to use. So I think that was one of the biggest impacts. And that's why I think when someone like Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft, comes out and says we accelerated by 10 years the cycle, I think what he's referring to is the fact that everyone in one fell swoop just got on board and started leveraging them.
I thought it was interesting what Katya said about this time kind of reshaping our habits and behaviors super quickly. I read your post about the 8 forecasts for the future where you make some predictions. I thought some of them were really interesting, but I'm curious what you think COVID, what types of behaviors we will change that will stay with us for the future.
Well, it's interesting because Paulina, I think a lot about this. The near-term obvious ones like being more open to remote working. Do we always have to be there in person? Someone said last night to me, every time I get tired of Zoom, I just imagine myself in LaGuardia, and then I'm happy again. And that's so true. It's these red eyes and waiting and security lines, all gone, like poof, So, but what I think will also be interesting is when we go back to this new normal and we can reconcile these two extremes of being back with people, but then also having gone through so long, in this new way of working. I think what we'll find, first of all, is that there's a new found appreciation for the time with people that we took for granted physically. I think there's an energy in the room that we've never fully capitalized on. I think a lot of us went to meetings and just shook our heads and participated without really always taking for granted the fact that everyone was there and we could have an emotional discussion, we could brainstorm, we could create, we could debate in a way that, now we can't, and we kind of miss it. So I think, my forecast for the future on this front is that we're all going to have dynamic by default workplaces. We're all going to hire people where the expectation is that you probably won't be in the office at a certain desk 80% of the time. However, every meeting that's scheduled, even though by default it will be remote, every now and then you'll check the IRL, the in real life box. And when people show up to that meeting, they show up with this other level of intention, and there's something else that happens there that is magical and sacred.
That's great. Like that. Well, we are getting so many good questions from the audience. I'm going to ask a couple of them. They're literally just pouring in. Scott, what's the biggest mistake you see with the first mile of software products today?
Well, that's one of my favorite topics. So whoever asked that question, thank you. I mean, the biggest mistake that every product makes in its first mile, and I think this is important for consumer products and enterprise products. And what I mean by first mile is, what do you see when you first come to the product or experience? What's your onboarding experience like? What's the default state of the product when you land? What's done for you versus what things do you have to do? What's the friction or lack of friction you have to go through to start to find some value in this product? The biggest mistake we make is that we forget that every new user of a product or service is lazy, vain, and selfish in their first 30 seconds of using it. We're lazy in the sense that we don't want to take time to read something or watch something. We're vain in the sense that we're busy, we're overwhelmed, and this better make me look good. If it's an enterprise product, it better make me look good to my bosses. I better look more productive and more efficient. When Stripe launched, their value proposition to developers was payments with 2 lines of code. That was appealing to both the laziness of the developer as well as the vanity of the developer for achieving payments, an incredible solution, so easily and on their own. And then the last thing is selfishness. This has to serve me now. And I think a lot of community products make this mistake where we say, hey, join a community for the benefits of discovery and whatever else, as opposed to join a community and instantly see the benefits to you, the ego analytics, if you will, of how this is serving you. And I think one of the dirty little secrets of social media, like Instagram, for example, is that it's more about seeing who saw your content than seeing other people's content. And if you look at the metrics of logins and usage, they support that.
Interesting. Is it okay, Pauline, if I ask another question off the chat? Okay, here's one that it could take you an hour to answer, but I'll force you to do it in 30 seconds. So you are a prolific angel investor. A lot of people know that. How do you make your decisions on the pre-seed, seed investments?
For early stage teams, actually, you could argue that this is as much a weakness because I think a lot of the best investors in the world are like truly anchored on the present, and they really understand, and they look at everything that's pitched to them and they try to find out why this person is making this up and BS, or why this product will fail, or why the market's smaller than it is. They're constantly looking and scrutinizing and pulling it apart. And I do the opposite. I mean, I'm such an optimist, and every product and person I meet, I try to figure out what this could be. But what I look for is when I get super excited about that and can't get it out of my head. And I'm one of those people that tries to meet with every person I invest in multiple times. And one litmus test for me is each conversation, its step function, more interesting than the one before it? Or do we feel like we're going over the same thing all over again? Which to me is an indicator of what this person will be like as a leader for their teams, how they'll even view their product, and whether they'll ever be satisfied with it, and a number of other character traits that I think are important.
So with what you just said in mind, what's the fastest investment decision you've made? Because it seems like it would take a little while because you'd want to have these multiple conversations.
Yeah, well, the faster ones that I've made are ones where I've followed the person for a while. And that's why I love, everyone loves their own form of social media. For me, it's Twitter. I just get to follow the people I admire, the designers, the engineers, the past founders who are then starting something new. And I get sort of popularized with how they think. And so sometimes when I finally get them on the phone and hear about their new thing, and it's so in line with what they've been talking about for a long time, in those cases, I can just make a very snap decision.
What's your favorite productivity software?
Favorite productivity software?
I mean, besides Adobe.
Yeah. Well, that's more creativity software, I guess. Although Document Cloud is right up there. A couple things that I use these days. So I use Notion. For those of you that don't know, like Notion is a great organizational tool that links things really thoughtfully and makes everything a database by default. And so it's really helpful and easy to find things. I use, what else do I use? I use Microsoft To Do these days. I think it's a very effective, way. I'm a compulsive capturer, and I get anxious when I feel like there's something that's actionable that's not captured and managed. And so I have my own ritual where I kind of go through and flush the stuff that I haven't gotten done yet, feel the granularity of the stuff that's slipping.
One question here that I like is, can you share how you and Adobe are thinking about replicating the in-person connections for the remote first world?
In terms of how we work?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so there's a new concept I've been thinking a lot about lately, and I'll share it with you all here first. And I call it spontaneity as a service. And I think that's what's missing in our lives these days. We are so efficient. I mean, think about it. I can be speaking with you and then instantly be in a room with 50 engineers solving a problem, and then instantly be talking to someone who covers us from Wall Street. And it's like no switching costs. And as a result of this, we, first of all, have missed the cognitive gap that we usually have during our days, where you get into the Uber, or you get on a plane, or you're waiting in the lobby for someone, or you're waiting at lunch for someone. And those cognitive gaps, I think we always wanted to eliminate them until we lost them. And now we miss them, because it was during those times where your mind would wander and ponder, where you'd see someone or have a mistake of the eye that makes you think of something you need to do. And it was also in the office, that was the time where you would, as people were shuffling in the room and out of the room, you would talk to someone and go up to them one-on-one and say, hey, what I really meant by that comment is this. Or you would have little exchanges in hallways. And I think that spontaneity that drives so much innovation and prioritization by natural selection, otherwise known as nagging, when people sort of see each other on the edges and say, oh, don't forget to do this. I mean, these are positive forces that we no longer have. There are technologies that are emerging right now to solve this. There's a few. I mean, one I saw the other day is literally a digital representation of the office in your browser that you go to every day, and you see your avatar, and it's only audio. And as you walk around and get closer to other avatars, you start hearing their conversation, and it gets louder and louder as you approach. And then you realize you're sitting and talking. And I was testing this out. And for whatever reason, I was talking to two people, and we decided to sit down on these digital couches with our avatars to continue talking. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. We don't have to sit down. But yet, like, I was in the confines of an office in my head. And it was one of those things where you can imagine having some period in your day where you're just having these experiences with your colleagues is spontaneity.
So if you can, is Adobe, like, what's your view on Adobe going, like, what percent work from home will be like the future when the pandemic's
Yeah.
done? What's going to be work from home?
Well, we've been 100% work from home for the last 9 months or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think it's, I think we will ultimately land in a place where we have a dynamic workforce where, again, people are not expected anymore to be on site every single day. Um, and we've watched productivity really closely, and I can measure productivity in my organization with metrics like Jira tickets, for our code commits, and and design files created and stuff like that. And I can tell you that in most cases it's at, if not above, where it was before. So it's very hard to argue that we're losing out on our potential as a company. However, when it comes to innovation and getting people aligned, it takes a lot more work, and I think that's where we'll leverage the in-person experiences. But I think we'll land in a place that is way more dynamic. And talk about an accelerated future. These were things we talked about before COVID, but no one ever really took seriously, and we had no forcing function to do it. I'm excited that we finally are going to take the leap.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's an unfortunate forcing function.
It is.
Obviously. Hey, someone asked, what is the product with the digital avatars walking around and listening? Was it, remember the name? Was
Yeah,
it called the?
it's pre-launch, but I think they might be. I actually don't remember their project name. I don't think they've actually officially launched their brand yet.
Okay.
So
It wasn't the online.town?
no,
Somebody asked? Okay.
but there are a number of new startups like this.
Okay. Yeah, it seems, that seems almost scary in a way. Okay. Talk a little bit about creativity being the new productivity. I know it's one of your other favorite topics.
Well, I think a lot about the past multiple decades where we all stood out at work based on our productivity. Students were trained to essentially be productive members of the workforce. And the deployment of productivity tools, of course, Microsoft is the first one that comes to mind, but many more. That was the way you drove productivity in the enterprise. That's how also people grew in their careers, was accomplishing more and being efficient. Well, here we are in this new age of AI, where everything that drove productivity is already, in some cases, being rivaled by their artificial intelligent equivalent. These bots, these automated processes. In fact, a lot of modern enterprise tools these days are capturing the data of how people use them in a company so that they can then layer on automation on top of that and allow robots to do a lot of this stuff for us. And so that begs the question, what's the future of labor? How are we going to be future proof from a career perspective? And what should we be doing with our kids to have jobs in this new world? Well, I mean, the most uniquely human thing we've got is creativity. And it's the only thing that we really don't understand the DNA of, really. And it's not something that a model can just do for us. And what does creativity mean for everyday knowledge workers? It means visually expressing that data on your spreadsheet with really compelling infographics that helps everyone understand what you're talking about. It means building prototypes that are worth 1,000 meetings. You just walk people through what you're trying to achieve, and everyone just instantly gets aligned with it. These are all things built by people with creative skills and tools. And so some of the things that I think about in my day job, Chief Product Officer at Adobe, is how do we roll out and deploy creativity tools the way we once deployed productivity tools? And how do we make sure that it's well beyond the design team, that everyone has access to create things from templates, to work with their designers and stay on brand and consistent in terms of the same fonts and elements, etc. And so I actually do believe that creativity will be the new productivity, in the sense that it will be what helps humans stand out going forward.
Great. So listen, well, Scott, we have time for one more, and then we're going to just end it at 2:30. So we have like 1 minute left, and then we'll pick up with Steve Hindy. So another question from the Q&A. This person obviously has read a lot of your books, because the question is, How do you find resilience to keep going when it looks like the messy middle never ends?
Well, the messy middle, should it ever end, right? Um, my wife, who's a psychologist, likes to say that you're either struggling or you're in denial. I think what she means by that is that we all have some struggle, and as I'm an optimist, so maybe she's always reminding me that I need to tune into my inner struggle. Um,
Yeah.
but I think that this is a question I oftentimes get from entrepreneurs who are in the thick of it, years into what they're doing. And if they can get to the really honest conversation with me, it typically is around the lines of, should I quit or should I stick with this? And what I always challenge them to think about is, first, the level of conviction they had when they started. They believe the world should be a certain way. They envision an industry changing, and that conviction was extraordinarily high, so high that they were willing to take the risk to leave their job and to start something new and risk failure. And then from that point forward, they started gathering data. They started getting shoulder to shoulder with customers. They started trying and iterating and pivoting and trying again, et cetera. And I always ask, from the experiences you've had thus far, be honest with me. Do you have as much, if not more, conviction that the world is going to turn out that way, that needs to be that way, that that's the solution to the problem? Or do you have less conviction? And it's fine. Either way, you've learned so much now. I mean, you have so much more information. You must feel one way or the other. And so, sometimes they'll say, I have more conviction. Like, I know that customers need this. We just still have not figured it out. And in that instance, I'm like, hey, you're just in the messy middle then. Like, it's par for the course. Yes, you have no end in sight, complete ambiguity, uncertainty, insecurity. You're just one of many. Like, stick with it. Don't think you're special. Don't give up. Keep the team together, build the culture, etc. But oftentimes they'll come back and say, you know what, to be honest with you, like, I don't know if the market's there. Like, we've learned this, and then I learned that, and then I learned this. And in those instances, I oftentimes encourage them to try something else. I'm like, hey, like, it's don't get stuck with the sunk cost fallacy here. Like, if the conviction has withered, um, seek motivation in something else you're truly excited about.